in addition to the job loss, in addition to the loss of investment, which of course slows down economic growth, which puts less money in everybody's pocket, we're also blocking precisely those energy sources that would lower your cost of energy the most.
Before we get into the headlines and the policy, I want to start where people actually live. Because for most folks watching this, climate and energy can feel like something happening out there in Washington, in reports and speeches. But the truth is, it's not out there at all. It shows up every single month. When your electric bill is higher than you expected, when you're standing at the pump doing the math inside your head, when families who are already stretched thin are trying to figure out, what do I cut back this month? And what we're going to unpack today is something really important. These costs don't just happen. They're not just random. They're the result of decisions. Decisions about what we invest in, decisions about whether we build for the future or stay stuck in the past, decisions about whether we protect American families or leave them exposed. I'm so fortunate to have with me Congressman Sean Casten. Welcome to At Our Table.
Thanks so much for having me, Jaime. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you, Congressman. Now, listen, you have spent your career, not just in Congress, but in the energy space itself. So thinking about how we power this country and what it costs for every day, that's something that you've thought of your entire career. Where did that interest come from?
The truth is, like all of it, it starts around, the table you eat at as a kid. My dad was a Boy Scout. My mom was a teacher in a whole host of primarily inner city communities, and both of them just kind of, they instilled in me and my brother and my sister that you got to leave this campsite a little better than you found it, as the old Boy Scout motto says. And I could give you a bunch more from that, but that's the core of how you get here. Now, a little bit more detail than that, I was born in 71, either 76 or 77. My dad testified before the Senate on the bill that became the Public Utility Reform Policy Act, which for the first time allowed non-utility players to connect to the grid, and then built the third plant that was allowed to be connected into that system, which was about twice as efficient as the U.S. electric grid at the time. And so I also sort of grew up in a household where I was taught that you can leave this campsite better, and you can leave your wallet a little fatter in the same process by doing the same thing. Because at the end of the day, the dirtiest forms of energy in America, the most polluting forms of energy in America, are also the most expensive ones.
Mm. Was there a particular moment or experience that sticks out for you in terms of that just made it more personal to you, and you said, this is something that I want to build a whole career around?
I feel like I should have a pithy answer to that question. Let me maybe, I was already sort of down the career, but let me tell you when I thought that this was really more of a policy problem.
Yeah.
So many, many years ago, we built a little, it was a little cogeneration plant in the basement of a jail in Boston. And this was taking there's a steam system in Boston that distributes high pressure steam in a pipe, and then it gets into the jail, and they put it through a valve, and they lower the pressure of the steam. And I'm expanding my hand as I do this because lower pressure steam takes up more space. And so we just put a little turbine in that said, if you're gonna expand that through a valve, let's turn a turbine and make some free electricity along for the ride.
Yeah.
We built this thing. It's really simple technology. This is literally like Thomas Edison vintage technology. It took us a full 2 years before the utility would allow us to close the breaker and turn that system on. They raised all sorts of technical objections, but ultimately their objection was that we were making power cheaper than they could sell it to the jail. And once we gave that jail access to zero carbon electricity, which also, by the way, had zero cost, they were never going to go back to the utility.
Yeah.
And so we presented a competitive threat, and one of the final technical meetings where we'd addressed everything that they said was a technical issue, the utility said, "We're still not gonna let you connect." And the guy who was running the jail in this thick Boston accent looked at the guy from the utility and he said, "You got two choices in front of you right now." And he put his hand on his holster. He said, "You can leave this building your way, you can leave this building my way." and, and the guy from the utility says to him, "Are you threatening me?" And he looks at him, leans in, he goes, "You're goddamn right I'm threatening you." And I tell that story because this is 100-year-old technology that would lower pollution, that would save money for that jail. And the only reason that we were allowed to turn it on was because the guy in the jail had a loaded firearm in the jurisdiction to use it.
Wow.
And if you want to understand sort of why we have a policy problem lowering people's cost of energy, that's the vignette that sort of got me turned around to saying, I was thinking this was a business problem. I was thinking this was a technology problem. And you sit there and say, this is a law problem.
Yeah.
And I guess the good news is I don't know how to change the laws of physics. I don't know how to change the laws of economics. But the laws of the United States, as you know well, all you gotta do is get elected, and you can change those.
And, Congressman, that's a powerful story, and listen, as someone who lobbied for a little while, you do know that special interests have a lot of power, and then they can stand in the way or they can either stand in the way or they can help accelerate progress, and it's sad to see that in this situation, that folks are standing in the way, because somebody was profiting off of that, and I guess, we're just a little upset about, having you dip into their pockets a little bit.
Yeah, and look, I'll give some sympathy. As a guy who, ran a couple businesses before, I also would have preferred that I not have any competition. I also would have preferred, you go into a widget sale conversation and your customer says, how much you want for those widgets. You don't lead with the low price, you lead with the high price. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's sort of how
Yeah.
markets work. So I don't begrudge people for, whether in their lobbying capacity or otherwise, saying I'm in the widget business and I'd like the prices of widgets to be high. That's fine. But I think those of us in public office need to recognize that the consumer wants prices to be low. And if we're going to have an energy policy that puts consumers first, we need to recognize, like, yeah, we need competitive markets, but we need to recognize that, competition is our friend, and it's especially your friend when you're being told by a regulated monopoly that competition will ruin this market.
Yeah. I Congressman, I wanna get into, something that just happened recently. So Climate Power just dropped their energy crisis snapshot. So for people who haven't seen this yet, what's the headline from that report? What does this report tell us about where American families stand right now as it relates to the energy crisis?
So the big headline, and look, I almost prefer to describe this report without saying the word climate, because as soon as we say the word
Mm,
climate, you get,
yep.
political schisms come up. But what this report says is that there's an industry in the United States that has lost 180,000 jobs since Trump came to office, and $61 billion of investments were not made in the U.S. economy because of actions that Trump took in just this
Wow.
one industry. If that's all you know, you've kind of got the punchline, right? Now, in this particular case, they're saying that those jobs that were eliminated were in clean energy jobs. And look, let's just call it the lowest cost energy jobs because that's what they are, right?
Yep.
Those investments that were not made were investments in things that would lower your cost of energy. And so, in addition to the job loss, in addition to the loss of investment, which of course slows down economic growth, which puts less money in everybody's pocket, we're also blocking precisely those energy sources that would lower your cost of energy the most. And there are exogenous factors. I'm not saying the president controls absolutely everything, but when you go to Massachusetts and you tell a developer who's put billions of dollars into a wind project that's going to provide power that has zero marginal operating costs. It costs them nothing. Once the wind is blowing, the power
Mm-hmm.
just flows into the grid. If you go to someone who's made those billions of dollars of investment, has obeyed every law and every permit, and say, "I'm gonna block your project," what you are both telling that investor, "Don't invest in the United States unless you're prepared to bribe the president because he will not honor the law," which drives a whole lot of other investors out. But you're also saying to the people in that energy system, "You're not gonna get that cheap power you wanted." Which means you're gonna have to run the coal plant a little longer, which costs you a lot of money to run. You're gonna have to run the gas plant a little longer, which costs you a lot of money to run. You're gonna have more congestion on your grid, which increases the line losses and means just supply and demand, the prices are gonna go up. And so those decisions have directly led to significant increases in the cost of electricity, significant increases in the demand for fossil fuels, which pushes up the price of those fuels, even if you're just using them for heating. And that's even before we get to Iran,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so yes, it's been detrimental to the clean energy industry, but it's really bad for the United States, and it's bad for every single consumer.
And it's really bad given that the president came into office talking about energy dominance, right? But this recent report says that the electric bills have risen almost, about 13% nationally since Trump took
Yeah.
office, and that gas prices, natural gas prices in residences are up 12%. So when you see those numbers, what does energy dominance then actually mean for people in your district or around the country?
Let me maybe just back up because I think these numbers are so big that it's easy to well, the numbers are so big that this that deserve talking through.
Yep.
The Many of our European partners, the Danish, the Swiss, the UK, generate 2 to 3 times as much economic value per unit of energy consumed as the United States does. They have very comparably diversified economies. And the primary difference is that, unlike the United States, they have chosen not to subsidize fossil fuel production, have chosen not to elevate the interests of energy producers over energy consumers. And that means that if forget about getting to 3 times, if we could just get to 2 times, we could all be
Mm,
twice as rich with the same environmental footprint. Alternatively, we could cut our environmental footprint in half and have the same standard of living, or anywhere in between those 2 continuums. I say that in response to your question because if we were to do that and just copy what other countries have done, you would see a massive wealth transfer from those fairly small parts of the country whose economy depends on fossil fuel extraction. The coal seams of Appalachia,
yep.
the gas patch along the Gulf Coast, and a massive wealth transfer to the much larger part of the country that's where most people live and work and pay for energy. And so this would be a huge net gain for almost all Americans, but not all of them. And if you look at where the leadership of today's Republican Party comes from, Mike Johnson is from the Gulf Coast. Mike Johnson's constituents are better off when the price of natural gas goes up.
Yep.
John Thune, represents, South Dakota, the Bakken oil shale. That economy increasingly is better off when the price of oil goes up. I can respect that they are looking out for the interests of their constituents. But what they're doing is making the vast majority of Americans who would rather pay less for gas, would rather pay less for oil, much worse off. And the folks in the Trump White House, the Chris Wrights of the world who's running the Department of Energy, they also come from worlds where all of their economic fortunes are tied to higher energy prices. Jared Kushner got to have a private equity fund because of the Saudis. The Saudis like it when the price of oil is high, not low, right? And and so what happens, for those of us who represent the overwhelming majority of Americans, they're sitting there saying, you know, why is my gasoline so expensive? Why is my heating bill going up? And the answer is it's kind of by intentional design.
Hmm. This report also, Congressman, says that there were 365 clean energy projects that were canceled. They were either canceled, delayed, or that they're currently laying off staff, and that's about 180,000 jobs, about $61 billion
Mhm.
in lost private investment. That's big, and that's a big deal. So how do we get here, and who made those actual decisions?
Well, so first I wanna take you back to when we passed the Inflation Reduction Act.
Mhm.
We were keenly aware that the that this transition had a wealth transfer element to it, and so we put provisions in there that said, "We will give you a bigger federal incentive if you're building these projects in an energy transition community." Because whether or not you represent a West Virginia coal field, we're all Americans, right? Let's make sure that nobody feels left behind by this.
Mm.
And so, because the extractive parts of our country tend to be politically redder,
Yep.
that meant that the majority of the IRA investments went to redder parts of the country. Just because that's not because we were trying to cherry pick Republicans, but I say that because having set that out, what I find is striking in the list of the 385 or so is that it's about an even split between, Republican districts and Democratic districts, which says 2 things to me. Number 1, this administration is hurting their own voters.
Yep.
Number 2, the fact that it's an even split means that they are doing their best to target Democratic areas because the majority of the projects were in Republican areas, and it's 50-50 on the Republican-Democratic split on these projects, and we've certainly seen that in Illinois where, the president likes, getting in Twitter wars with Governor Pritzker. There's a targeting that's there, but even with that intentional targeting, they're still hurting a lot of communities, and remember, like, if you're one of these communities in Appalachia that saw manual mining become automated, automated coal mining lose market share to natural gas, and then lose more market share to clean energy, you really need something in your economy. And that battery factory that we funded to go in there, the hydrogen hub that we funded to go into those communities, those were real good jobs coming to those communities.
It's
And
exactly right. I mean, this report basically said that Texas is leading the country in terms of energy jobs lost.
yeah,
52,000 jobs. My home state of South Carolina, thousands of jobs. Ohio, Arizona, all of these are either red or purple states, and these are massive job losses. I just don't understand why this administration is so anchored in the past instead of thinking about, a brighter, more equitable future for all of us.
well, I mean, look, I sometimes say that, like, statistically, half the population is below average, which 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 means that half the population, would rather not have to compete on their merits, right?
Mm,
And the backlash against competition in the energy sector that would bring on the lowest cost sources is comes from the same place as the backlash against DEI initiatives and making sure that we affirm our commitment to equality. Because if you're a mediocre white dude in a mediocre business, you really don't wanna have to swim in the deeper end of the pool if you can avoid
mm.
it, right? Nobody naturally hires Don Trump to work for their business. Right? Like, that's certainly not if you got other options.
That's exactly
And,
right.
and that all sounds sort of pejorative, but the the clean energy sector has had an amazing amount of success over the last couple of years, the last couple of decades, purely on economics. Coal-fired power was 50% of the US grid 15 years ago. It's now under 20%. The American people used about 20 million barrels of oil a day 15 years ago. We use about the same amount today. The all of that sort of loss of market share has come because people given the choice went for the cheaper and cleaner sources. And so we now generate more power from not just renewables, but even leave out hydro that was historically the biggest renewable source in the grid. We generate more power from non-hydro renewables than we do from coal, which means that you've put a bunch of downward pressure on the prices for energy because we keep building these assets that don't cost anything to run. Well, that's a huge problem for the fossil fuel sector. And, and I think it behooves us to have some empathy. I keep going back to Appalachia, but,
Mhm.
have some empathy for that family, in some holler in Kentucky or West Virginia who's saying, "My grandpa had dignity. My
Yep.
my dad had a town that had a couple churches and had, like, a good downtown, and I got none of that." And what I know is that, the coal mine went bankrupt so that they could wipe out my pension, and I didn't get any coverage for the black lung disease, and government didn't look out for me, which means that I don't really trust people saying government's gonna come here to make my life better. And that makes them, I think, very maybe more receptive to a populist like Donald Trump than they should be. But I think it also, you know, creates a situation that we do have to be empathetic to of saying, and this is why I said it matters how big a scale of the problem this is with we could double our energy efficiency. That's a lot of communities.
Mhm.
It's a minority of communities, but this is devastating for those communities if we're not intentional about trying to look out for them.
And Congressman, that's what I love about your approach because it seems like families and consumers are grounded. They're in the middle. That's
Yeah,
the heart and foundation of it. And I know you just recently introduced a bill, what it's called the Energy Bills Relief Act, and it's focused on families and consumers. Can you
yeah.
talk a little bit about that? And again, strip away some of the policy language. What's the bottom line, and how does it actually help a family lower their bills or that's in one of these communities that is transitioning?
So like the overall and I gotta give props to my friend and colleague, Mike Levin, who was my partner in good trouble on this legislation. But the overarching theme was what would it look like for the United States to have an energy policy that that proudly and unambiguously put the interests of consumers over the interests of producers?
Mhm.
And so we're gonna do a bunch of things like making sure that everybody has access to the cheapest energy sources. If and by the way, the cheapest energy source is not having to use energy at all. So if I can help you to put in a better window pane so that you don't have that drafty window, so that you're not burning fuel all winter to keep your house warm, just because you didn't have appropriate insulation, let's make sure that you get money to afford that window so that you don't have to pay for power bills for your gas bills anymore. Once we're doing that, let's also make sure, if we can, that you can put a solar panel on your roof so that you don't have to pay for electric bills anymore. Let's make sure that you got money to go and purchase an electric vehicle. Again, if you want, you may not want to do these things, but let's give you access to those technologies that don't depend on first having saved some money up in your bank account to make the initial investment, right? So we've got a bunch of incentives for that. We then do a number of things to make the to turn the energy producers into our partners rather than our adversaries. Um, so we do things in there like saying, if an electric utility can lower your cost, let's go and say they can get a little bit of a higher return in their next rate case, because they make money by getting a return on capital. So let's give them the opportunity. If they can save you $100, maybe they get $20 and you get 80. But now but now you're aligned as partners to try to get this done instead of assuming that it's always gotta be a zero-sum game. If they can make investments that reduce the losses in our electric grid, let's turn in that to an economic win for them and not just a charitable gift they're making to their ratepayers. So let's fix all those rules. And I could get into a bunch of wonkier stuff as well, but that's really the key of saying let's make the producers our partners rather than our enemies, and let's make sure that every consumer has access to the lowest cost sources of energy, and let's just be unambiguous that it is in the national interest of the United States to have low cost energy.
Yeah. Well, listen, the energy costs were already on the rise before the situation that we now find ourselves in terms of with Iran. And we know that it's clearly a major factor in gas prices spike. I mean, even,
Yep.
lately I've been booking a lot of flights here and there, and I've noticed that the flights now are much more expensive than what they were a few months ago. How does a foreign policy decision of this magnitude ripple through to someone's, electricity bill or, filling up at the gas station?
Well, so the biggest swing, in the United States, we don't make very much electricity from oil.
Mhm.
On the other hand, the I mean, to call it a foreign policy is charitable. Whatever they're doing in the Strait of Hormuz did not involve looking at a map first. But the attacks that have happened as Iran tries to flex its economic power to shut down a lot of those natural gas facilities have
Mhm.
put huge upward pressure on the price of natural gas. And because the Trump administration had allowed a lot of US natural gas producers to export US gas overseas, the US gas price now tracks much closer to international prices than it used to. It used to be when all of our natural gas was trapped domestically, you had to sell to US consumers. Well, if now I've got the opportunity that, we bombed a huge facility, the Iranians bombed a huge facility in Qatar. Now that facility is not on the market. Now the global price is going up, which means that US producer can say, I could sell this to someone in Louisiana for a couple bucks, or I could sell it to someone in Europe for a couple bucks more. Which are you
Mhm.
going to take? Right? So that's put upward pressure on natural gas, and natural gas to a significant degree really sets the marginal price of power in the United States. In most parts of the country, you the price of power is set by a gas generator somewhere, and so when the price of gas goes up, the price that generator has to be paid goes up. So a lot of the higher rates that we're seeing right now, you can trace directly to the decision made by the Trump administration to reverse Biden decisions to couple US gas prices to foreign markets, and then the war in Iran, which massively pushed up foreign natural gas prices.
Do you see any relief in sight? Anything positive that you could say to your constituents or the American people that
Mm. Well, the silver lining through all this is that given the choice, markets win. The stuff that I'd said about over the last 2 decades, our vehicles really have gotten a lot more efficient. Are We really have deployed a lot of these lower cost technologies. We have not deployed those technologies as fast as we should have. We've not deployed them as fast as we could have if we hadn't been subsidizing producers who couldn't otherwise compete. But the trend lines are still there.
Yeah.
And so even in the absence of federal leadership, it's worth noting that those were 2-decade trends. Those were trends that were underway under the second Bush administration. They were underway through the Obama administration. They were underway through the first Trump administration. Um, this is just markets doing what markets do. I think from a public policy perspective, a lot of the frustration in my voice is that we we would like to make sure that every American has access to the cheapest energy, not just the ones with the disposable income to make the investments necessary to connect that to their home. And so the distribution has not been as equitable as it could be, but the trend lines are still very positive.
I wanna talk briefly about the midterms. We know that pocketbook issues are really, really important. Do you think that, energy cost is gonna be a significant political issue heading into the election cycle?
I mean, look, if you could, I'm not saying we should, but if you could ignore all of the pain that's being created by the energy cost that Trump is doing, and if you could just put that all to the side and say politically, how would you feel if the president of the United States and the Republican Party caused everybody to pay 70, 80, $100 every time they fill their gas car, their gas, their gasoline-fueled
Yeah.
vehicle over the July 4th weekend? Um, you know, please, Brer Rabbit, don't throw me into that briar patch. Right? I think it is unfortunately true that energy energy is only a salient issue when energy prices are high in an election season.
Yeah.
I would love it if we always had a more thoughtful conversation, but the policies coming out of this White House on both the foreign policy perspective and domestic energy perspective are m m m putting us in a position where energy is going to be extremely salient in this midterm election.
Do you think there are any Republican members who think privately or have said to you on the floor that, man, this is a problem and we made this bed and man, it's a very uncomfortable one to sleep in?
There's quite a few, and I think the challenge they have is that they're not comfortable yet standing up to their leadership. I mean,
Yeah.
remember what I was saying about, like, that this is a huge wealth transfer from fossil fuel producing America to energy consuming America. The Mike Johnson has a rooting interest in high prices. John Thune has a rooting interest in higher prices. The entire Iowa delegation has a rooting interest in lower prices. The they don't have coal seams in Iowa, they don't have gas production in Iowa, they do have a ton of wind. They have a ton of biofuel. They got a ton of farmers who would like their fertilizer costs to be lower, rather than higher, and fertilizer, of course, goes up as the gas price goes up. And you could go around a lot of other parts of the country where that's also true. I think the difficulty is that you don't have Republicans in leadership who are situated in that way, but there's a lot of rank and file Republicans who agree with the need to say, let's put consumers first in our energy policy. A, because it's good policy, and B, because it's good politics.
Yeah. Two more quick questions for you. The first one is, this is something that we always do on the show, and it's a special honor, and you don't want to get it. You don't want to be the recipient of this honor. It's called the Sit Your Ass Down Award. In this moment, whether it's on energy or just how folks are conducting themselves in public office, who do you believe needs to sit their ass down, stop the spin, and just level with the American people?
Mike Lawler.
Mike Lawler.
I mean, that guy is on TV all the time, and I don't think I've ever heard a clip of him that I came away smarter. So I think, in the interest of the intelligence and respect of the American people, like, if he just stayed quiet for the next couple months, we'd all be better off.
Well, you know what's even better is if he loses in November, and then you won't have to see him for a
Yes,
long
yes.
time. So Mike Lawler, you are this week's recipient of the Sit Your Ass Down Award. And Congressman, as we close, if someone is watching or listening to this and they're just angry and they're angry about, the price of gas, they're angry that their electric bill is up, they're angry that some of the jobs that they thought were coming to their state or their community, the clean energy jobs, are now gone mysteriously. What do you want those folks to do with that energy, that frustration between now and election day?
Look, I think the most important thing is don't ever give up on democracy. We have gone through crises in our history before. We've gone through crises that were, this one gets worse every day, so I'm always hesitant to say we've had worse times, but we went through a civil war. We've had really hard issues as a country. And I would challenge you to name one challenge our country ever faced that we came out on the right side of, where the motivation to get to the right side came from the top down. It always comes from the bottom up, right? And the thing that other countries envy about America is not that we elect fantastic people, present company excluded. It's that the American people have never given up on democracy and never given up on insisting that we could be better tomorrow than we were today. And the reason why the Trump administration is so scared about the next election is because they know that the American people are better than they are. And so, all the great organizing work that you've done, going out, knocking those doors, going into rooms where you don't agree with everybody in the room going in, but you're going to treat them with respect and persuade them so that when you get out, you're all on the same page and you're agreeing that in the first instance, we're all Americans and we're all real proud of that, right? That's how we get through this.
Well, Congressman Sean Casten, thank you so much for taking a seat at our table.
Thank you, Jaime. Honor to be on.
Thank you. If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pixel Plus, or anywhere you find your podcasts. For bonus content and analysis, join our community on Substack at jamieharrison.substack.com. At Our Table with Jaime Harrison is a production of Vision Blue Media. Our founding executive producers are Jason Hyder and Jaime Harrison. Our producer is Kyle Kelly. Our content consultants are Ernie Grigg and Clay Middleton. Our digital communications are led by Lauren Brown. Our social media strategist is Nia Asanta. Inez Malasky provides production legal. Title sequence by Tom Hunt. Our theme song, Blonde Gone, is written by Dewey and published by Alibi Music Library. Special thanks to Congressman Sean Casten and his team. I'm Jaime Harrison, and I look forward to another conversation at our table.